how to clean and explore data at the command line. It covers how to model data on the command line, of course. It covers how to create your own command line tools.
Whatever you type at the command line can also be turned into a command line tool. It's conceptually similar to writing a function in a programming language. Brenda Romero, who's also a game designer, she recently had a tweet about she was wondering how many game designers were actually using Python and Pandas in order to analyze their data.
Jeroen, welcome to the Super Data Science Podcast. I'm so excited to have you on. I've been looking forward to this episode for weeks, and now you're here. Where in the world are you calling in from?
Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I'm calling in from Rotterdam, the Netherlands.
A shipping center of the globe.
Oh, yes. There's a lot of maritime activity over here.
Nice. So we know each other directly through Jared Lander, who was in episode 501. So Jared runs the New York Open Statistical Programming Meetup, which has made a huge difference in my life as well as in yours. So there's a common thread for us with this Open Statistical Programming Meetup in that it launched my book writing career, and it sounds like you have a similar story.
That's right. Yeah. So Jared reached out to the startup in New York where I was working at the time, and I was given the opportunity to give a talk. And I was thinking, what should I do a talk about? Well, I was a data scientist at this startup, and I was using command line tools. I was using the Linux command line to do some of my work. And I thought, hey, I have a few things to say about that. And while I was preparing the talk, I also wrote a blog post. And this was in 2013 already. And that blog post eventually got number one on Hacker News for a full day. Yes, wow. I never had a blog post like that ever. Set the bar very high. No, but then I thought like, hey, maybe there is something here. And that eventually led me to writing the book. And of course, I got a lot of help from plenty of people along the way. And one of them is Jared.
Yeah, so O'Reilly picked up the book, and probably the most well-known technical publisher on the planet. I guess they saw that you had this incredibly popular blog post and reached out to you.
No, it's the other way around. Here I got the help from many more people, including Michael Dewar, and he introduced me to Mike Loukidis, who has been working for O'Reilly for a very long time. And I was able to convince him that we should do a book about data science at the command line.
Nice. Well, I can see why. For me, it's a fascinating topic. I try to use command line tools wherever I can. We're going to dig into this a lot in your episode. So before we get to that, we're going to talk about your book in a lot of detail, but you also have a connection to another recent guest, who is Veerle van Leemput. She was in episode 491. And so tell us a bit about that connection.
Yeah, I was very pleasantly surprised to find out that she did a podcast. So I did my PhD at Tilburg University, and I also taught at that same university, and that's where Veerle did her master's degree. And I was lucky enough to be supervising her master thesis. And I was very fortunate to be able to introduce her to some R packages that I had recently learned, including the tidyverse. And it's obvious that she has picked that up very well and moving into developing Shiny applications. So that was great to see.
Yeah, exactly. That was the topic of the episode. We talked a ton about R Shiny and the tidyverse. And thank you for correcting my pronunciation of her name. I butchered Dutch names. Right. Oh my goodness.
We are so much more than names, of course.
Trying to get better. So back to data science at the command line. So that ended up being the title of your book. So you had a first edition that came out in 2014. And now you have a second edition that just came out. It came out in October, and it's actually freely available online. It's not exactly the same as the version published by O'Reilly, that you can order print copies from O'Reilly, or you can go to O'Reilly.com and go into their learning platform and see a digital version. So the free online version, slight differences in that it's kind of your screenshots or sketches in the live in the free version, but all the content is there. So that's something that
Yeah.
Listeners can check out risk free at no cost, and then hopefully if they like it, they're willing to buy the physical copy or access the digital copy, so that I think that's the right thing to do in those kinds of circumstances. But it's an amazing book. It covers how to clean and explore data at the command line. It covers how to model data on the command line, of course. It covers how to create your own command line tools, which is actually something that you spoke about recently at the New York R conference. We were both speaking at that. And that's where we recorded a Super Data Science episode. It was the first ever Super Data Science episode live in front of a studio audience, number 511, with Drew Conway, whom you probably also know.
We've interacted a couple of times.
I am unsurprised. So creating command line tools is a big focus, and it has a new chapter that wasn't in the first edition on polyglot data science. So about having many languages in your data science toolkit, and I imagine there's something there on how command line tools allow you to kind of bring all those together and make the most of everything. So
that's right.
Tell us about the book. Beyond the kind of high level summary that I just gave.
Yeah. So, okay. The book is indeed freely available, datascience@commandline.com. Once I have updated those images, it will actually be the same as the book.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yeah. Oh. I was very happy that O'Reilly allowed me to put the book online for free.
Yeah.
And I like that you mentioned risk-free, because next to this book, I have created a Docker image that allows you to try all these tools out risk-free, right? Because it's an isolated environment. And the command line, when you're first starting out, can be very intimidating. And you can indeed, it's not without risks. You can very easily wreck your system. And so when you are in this isolated environment, I used to have a virtual machine for this back in 2014, but now I've switched to a Docker image, and then of course once you run it, comes a Docker container. I'm still thinking about what's the easiest way to get people started, because I discuss over 100 different tools, and if you were to install them all manually, it would take you a good portion of the day. And that's, of course, not a fun way to get started. So I am thinking about this a lot, and how to make it easy for people to get started with this. Because while it's been around for over 50 years, this technology, the so-called command line, the Unix or Linux command line, there are still, I think that a lot of people would benefit from learning a trick or two from this environment.
I wholeheartedly agree, and I love the way that you're doing it. Having it in a Docker image, that for me is today the easiest way that you could be conveying this to the audience. So there's a few steps, maybe even at the command line, that somebody will have to execute to get that Docker image turned into a running container on their systems. But then, as you say, it has all of the dependencies that you need. In your case, like you're saying, over 100 different software tools already pre-installed, and everything is inside that container. So it's separate and, like you say, risk-free from all of the rest of your systems. And so the worst case scenario is that you mess up something inside the Docker container, but the rest of your computer will be absolutely fine. So I think you're doing things absolutely correctly there.
So having a Docker image was also for myself, because I wrote the entire book in R Markdown, which would take all the bash code and all the pipelines that I had written, compile it, and then stitch the output from each command back into the markdown source, which then is in turn being converted to a PDF and an ebook and a website and so forth. So what I wanted to avoid is that the code and the output from that code got out of sync. So that's why I decided, let's do this properly, have a Docker container, a Docker image, so that others can also benefit from this.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Eliminating unnecessary distractions is one of the central principles of my lifestyle. As such, I only subscribe to a handful of email newsletters, those that provide a massive signal-to-noise ratio. One of the very few that meet my strict criterion is the Data Science Insider. If you weren't aware of it already, the Data Science Insider is a 100% free newsletter that the Super Data Science team creates and sends out every Friday. We pore over all of the news and identify the most important breakthroughs in the fields of data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. The top 5, simply 5 news items. The top 5 items are handpicked, the items that we're confident will be most relevant to your personal and professional growth. Each of the 5 articles is summarized into a standardized, easy-to-read format and then packed gently into a single email. This means that you don't have to go and read the whole article. You can read our summary and be up to speed on the latest and greatest data innovations in no time at all. That said, if any items do particularly tickle your fancy, then you can click through and read the full article. This is what I do. I skim the Data Science Insider newsletter every week. Those items that are relevant to me, I read the summary in full. And if that signals to me that I should be digging into the full original piece, for example to pore over figures, equations, code, or experimental methodology, I click through and dig deep. So, if you'd like to get the best signal-to-noise ratio out there in data science, machine learning, and AI news, subscribe to the Data Science Insider, which is completely free, no strings attached, at superdatascience.com/DSI. That's superdatascience.com/DSI. And now, let's return to our amazing episode. And yeah, so for listeners who aren't already familiar with Docker containers, Docker images, this sounds like a great way to get started with that as well. And when you get into using data science in production systems at companies, Docker containers, Docker images, these are the standard today to allow your machine learning models to scale up across many different servers and execute efficiently. So definitely a skill worth having if you don't already. All right, so once a reader of your book has their Docker environment set up, then what do? You must teach them some Bash before getting into R and Python, or tell us about kind of the flow through the book.
Yeah, so the book starts with an introduction to, well, first of all, it explains, of course, what data science is, according to, well, some, right? If you ask 12 different people what data science means, you get back 13 different answers.
Right.
By the way, the book leans on the awesome model by Chris Wiggins and Hilary Mason. So after it has explained why the command line.
Oh, what do you mean by that? The awesome model? Like it's a template for book writing?
No, it's a OSEMN, which you could pronounce as awesome, where each letter stands for a task that you could do in data science or that you would need to do. And they are obtaining data. So that's the O. The S stands for scrubbing data. Then you have exploring data, then modeling data, and lastly, you have interpreting data. But then it's the N, which is capitalized and put into this acronym, which I don't discuss because I think that interpreting data, right? What do your results mean and how do you communicate that to your peers is not so much an activity you do at the computer. That's very much a human activity. But having said that, every step of the other 4 steps each have a chapter in this book. So there's a chapter on obtaining data where I talk about how you can convert how you can open up Excel files or just CSV files, how you can download data, how you can query RESTful APIs. Um, then there's a chapter on cleaning that up, of course, because rarely is the data that you get into a format that allows you to immediately work with.
Hmm.
So, and this could be anything that you could also do in Python or R. But sometimes you need to do a little bit of cleaning before you can even get that data into pandas or into the tidyverse,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm. Does
So
that involve things like awk and sed by chance? Does that
yeah,
come
I
up in there?
mean, awk and
Yeah.
set are two popular tools, popular command line tools that can do a lot of data cleaning there. Yeah, yeah. And awk is has to be one of my favorites, but I'm not sure if it's really fair because it's a programming language on its own, albeit
Right.
very restrictive. It's not like Python or R, but it allows you to do a lot with your data. Um, it reminds me of a story, a project that I once did for a client in Norway. They had this 2 GB JSON file that they just needed to change a little thing, but it had big implications. And they tried to use a tool called JQ, which is another command line tool that allows you to work with JSON data.
Hmm.
And JQ is one of the younger ones. Yeah, they couldn't do it. They just ran out of memory all the time, and then so this person, he had followed my workshop, data science at the command line, and he reached out and he said, "Hey, could you perhaps help us?" And so I tried a bunch of things, and in the end, I was able to fix the problem using awk, a tool and language from if I had to guess, the 80s, and
I
it was
think
able
so.
to
Yeah, at
solve this
least.
under a second and didn't use any any memory. So that just keeps reminding me that we don't often need bright and shiny new tools, right? There are a lot of tools already available that have been optimized throughout the years, and this is just one of those personal success stories there.
Hmm.
But yeah,
Yeah.
often said, and then there are about 100 others. But yeah, you don't need to know all of them, just as you don't need to know every single function from the tidyverse
Sure.
in order to be effective.
Sure, but a book like yours is perfect for giving people an overview. So maybe they don't need awk or sed today, but by
Nope.
being introduced to that and the 100 other tools, you kind of see, oh, okay, like there's another possible tool in my toolkit. They can
Yeah.
do a little bit of playing around safely
Yeah.
inside of a Docker container that you provide them. And then they can, okay, that'll stick in their memory. And maybe a year or two later, you're like, perfect opportunity for me to make use of one of these other tools.
There are tools written to this day, every day. I don't know about the majority of tools, right? I still find new tools on a regular basis. But what I think really matters is that after a while, you get accustomed to the environment that you're in. Like tools come and go, but it's the environment, the shell, the command line, also sometimes called the terminal, if you
Hmm.
will, although there are slight differences between these concepts. But once you're comfortable in that, what is sometimes a stark and unforgiving environment, once you're used to that, the tools themselves don't really matter because you have a bunch of them and you know how you can stitch them together
Hmm.
and then solve your task and then move on to the next one. So
Yeah, being comfortable at the command line in a programming language like Bash is a career-long investment as a data scientist. You will always be able to come back. Unix isn't going away. Jupyter
nope.
notebooks aren't going to be around forever. Something else is going to come along. And any of these click and point user interfaces, they're going to come and go over the decades long that you're a practicing data scientist. But it is unlikely
Yeah,
that
no, it's a
Unix command line is
wonderful
going to run out.
example
Yeah.
of the Lindy effect, right? It's been around for 50 years, so we can expect it to be around, well, for the rest of our lives, at least. So yeah, it's a worthwhile investment. Exactly.
Definitely. All right. So we've kind of covered cleaning and exploring data a little bit. Do you want to tell us a bit more about creating your own command line tools, which was the topic of your New York Art Conference talk in the fall?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So after a while, you realize that whatever you type at the command line can also be turned into a command line tool. It's conceptually similar to writing a function in a programming language, right? You're able
Hmm.
to abstract away from some code and to treat it as a black box. But the great thing about the command line is that it doesn't care about the language that a tool is written in.
Right.
Um, on any given day, I use tools that have been written in Perl, C, R, Python, JavaScript, even. So as long as they take in text, produce text, and it sounds a bit odd right now, but text is the universal interface in Unix.
Hmm.
But then you're able to combine those, and then yeah, the possibilities are limitless.
Yeah, it's the ultimate melting pot across
Yeah,
all of the programming languages. So whether
yeah,
you today happen to be a kind of data scientist who uses Python more or R more or SQL most of the time, it doesn't matter. At the command line, you can use all of these equally. And as you add more languages, more tools to your toolkit, they can all blend together in these kinds of scripts, which you so elegantly describe as a way to then abstract away things that you do repetitively and do everything more efficiently.
yeah. And one more thing about that, it's indeed you're expanding your own toolbox because of this, but you also have the ability, to expand uh, 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 other
Right.
toolboxes, the toolboxes that others have. And so, if someone is not familiar in, say, Python or R, just to name a few, that it doesn't matter. If you provide a little bit of documentation on how to use the tool, then they should be able to use it, install a few prerequisites, but then the interface is very familiar because it's all on the command line. And so that is one approach you can take when you want to be a polyglot data scientist.
Nice. Yeah. So then we're on to that new chapter. Is there anything else about that in particular that you want to focus on right here? I absolutely love this idea. I mean, in the same way that R and Python and SQL are the most popular programming languages in data science
Mhm.
today. Again, that's going to change. We
Yeah.
don't know what they're going to be in 5 years or 10 years. Those three languages will still be around in 5 years and 10 years, but who knows what else will come up. And again, being able to understand the command line means that it doesn't matter. Whatever comes along, you're going to be well prepared for blending that together with the tools you already have. So I don't know. Anything else from you?
Yeah. So yeah, of course, we mention Python and R quite a lot because they are the two most popular open source languages when it comes to doing data science. But also something like Spark, Apache Spark. It can take
Right.
in. It has a pipe method, right, where you can pipe all the items in an RDD to a command on the command line. And then once you realize that, again, there are so many possibilities. Um, but what really matters here as well is the mindset that you realize that you don't have to do everything in a single language. A lot of people, when they want to when they go into data science, right, they are of course overwhelmed, just like with everything else when you go into a new field. But then they'll see, oh, there are all these languages and all these tools. Which one should I learn? And
Mhm.
I think it's important to know you can't go wrong with either of them. And if
Yeah.
you at a certain point see a package that really solves your problem, it's a very specialized package, but it's not in your language, then it's not a big deal. You'll be able to still use
Totally.
that package and remain inside your preferred language. Yeah.
Nice. So that is a beautiful summary, Jeroen, of why this polyglot in data science is so valuable. All right. So let's move on to your business. So your business, Data Science Workshops, came about as a result of your first book. So the first edition, as I mentioned earlier, came out in 2014. And then by 2017, you had a full-time business of your own, Data Science Workshops, that kind of came out of the book. And so I'd love to hear about that. Data Science Workshops does data science training and coaching, of course, offering workshops, as the name would
Mhm.
suggest, but also in company courses, hackathons, meetups, and even kind of what you bill as inspiration sessions that could be shorter sessions that provide anyone, whether they are hands-on data scientists or not, so they could be managers, uh, providing them with kind of an inspiration of like what's possible with data science, transforming your organization towards a more data oriented, machine learning oriented organization. And so, yeah, so you offer all these different kinds of formats, and you offer them in a wide range of languages, which, given everything that we've talked about so far, should not be surprising. So there's you do workshops in Python, in R, in Bash, and even there's some JavaScript in there. So tell us more about your business beyond what I've just introduced.
Yeah, well, it sounds so good when you say it like that, but I didn't plan for this. When the book came out, I was contacted by a company in Barcelona, Spain, asking me whether I wanted to give a 1 day workshop to their team of engineers because he wanted them to give more exposure to the command line, and he didn't want to do this himself. They had some specialized command line tools for obtaining some data from their databases, which I really liked. In fact, I liked giving the workshop so much uh, that I decided to do this more often.
Mhm.
And not just about the command line, but um, also R and Python indeed, and lots of and of course languages are only tools, right? A means to an end. I also give workshops that are more focused on data visualization and machine learning, um, but yeah, it kind of grew out of that. And so I started giving more and more workshops at different companies until I decided in 2017 that it was time to just do this full time because I enjoyed it a lot. And yeah, it allowed me to put food on the table. So, and here we are 4 years in, and I'm still enjoying it very, very much.
Nice. Yeah, it's wonderful to be able to find something that stimulates you so much, that you enjoy so much, and that you can also do to put food on the table. It's a very
Yeah.
nice situation to be in, your own. So, yeah. So prior to running this data science workshops company, you had a very strong technical background. You did a PhD at Tilburg University, and then you were an assistant professor at the Geronimus Academy of Data Science. So it'd be interesting, maybe for our listeners, to talk a bit about what your PhD research was, how that kind of led you into this data science path.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So um, we can go one step back more, and that's I did a master's in artificial intelligence, and kind of stumbled into doing a PhD, um, which was more about machine learning, and then specifically detecting anomalies. So I spent
Mm-hmm.
5 years um, working on algorithms that yeah, that would detect anomalies. Uh, so yeah, 5.5 years, a long time. I think we spoke about LaTeX before the show, and
Yeah.
I think I spent about 6 months of those 5.5 years perfecting the layout of my PhD, um, which is I really enjoyed doing that, but it's designing is not particularly a skill which is appreciated too much, or it's not really um, used to advance your career within academia. So I decided to leave academia right after, or even before my PhD. I was lucky enough that most of the things that I had learned were all of a sudden being used in this role called data
Hmm.
scientist. It
Hmm.
didn't exist. This what was back in 2011. Didn't exist in the Netherlands. This title. There were no vacancies with this title. But on the other side of the pond, as they say, in New York, there were a lot of roles, and they yeah, I was very lucky that I could start working as a data scientist in New
Hmm.
York City.
Yeah, so
Um,
Outbrain, YPlan, Elsevier. Oh, Elsevier was back in the Netherlands. So by that point, they'd
yeah,
caught up. You could be a so
that's right.
you yeah, so you finished the PhD in 2013. Well, I guess you
No,
yeah you you,
that's
you
right.
finished defending in 2013. So it's very much the same timeline as me. It looks so I left Oxford where I did my PhD in 2012, started working, but I didn't have my dissertation submitted and defended until 2013 or 2014. I think it was 13.
Yeah.
Um, but I was I started work and I had the same experience when I started work. I worked as a trader at a hedge fund, and I did that for
Mm.
2 years. And I had never heard of this title, data scientist. I didn't love being a trader. I had a hard time staying motivated about uh, making money for its own sake. And so I left being a trader with the intention of actually. So I'd done my PhD in England as a trader. I was between New York and Singapore, and when I quit, my intention was, and it was literally in my resignation letter, was that I was going to move back to Canada and study medicine, which is something that I'd kind of always intended on doing in a way. But then at the same time, so in this period, I had like a month left on my rent in New York, and um, socially with a friend who worked at another company in New York that I'm sure you've heard of from your time here, ZocDoc, which is a marketplace for matching people looking for medical services with doctors. And so I met somebody who worked there who had the title data scientist.
Yep.
And I was like, whoa, it sounds like I could do that job. And
And
they
it
were
sounds
like,
very sexy.
yeah, they were
So
like, well, as it happens, there's a lot of people looking for you in this field. And I was like, wow, all right, maybe I should look into this instead of like, going on a 10-year path before I'm earning an income again down the medical route. And I love data science in case it
yep.
isn't obvious. So anyway, so yeah, so I'm sorry, I'm cutting off your story by just talking about
Oh no,
myself,
I
but
mean,
there's interesting parallels there, I think.
definitely, and it's a shame we didn't bump into each other in New York City. But um, yeah, in the Netherlands, when you do a PhD, you get a salary, but only for 4 years. After 4 years, you're on your own, and I wasn't quite finished.
Mm-hmm.
Mainly thanks to LATEC. Well, a bunch of other reasons, but I had to find a job. I had to
Right, right,
had to put
right.
food on the table again,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and so that's when New York came around. Exactly, and that's also when I made the switch from MATLAB. I remember you started out with MATLAB as well, but
Wow, yeah, you've listened to a lot of episodes. Yeah, that's right.
I like the
Yeah, it,
podcast. I do.
that's great. So in my undergrad, I was primarily using MATLAB, and then over the course of my PhD, more so into R, and then as
Mm.
a professional data scientist, now, mostly in Python. But yeah, that's right,
Yeah,
MATLAB.
MATLAB is was great, but it was also really expensive. So I decided, being a Dutch person, I of course don't want to pay for these things. So I moved. I moved to a free and open source alternative that was called Python. I
Octave.
remember I was
Oh,
using Pandas version 0.4 and still Python 2.6. I think, yeah, good old days.
yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's MathWorks, who creates the MATLAB software. They provide it for free to university students, and so that gets people hooked.
Yeah,
But then once you move into the professional world, yeah, the licenses for MATLAB are expensive. I mean, the nice thing about paying a lot for software like that is that it's really tidy. I mean, everything works together exactly as you'd anticipate, and everything's very well documented. In the open source world, it's obviously a bit more of a wild west, but it's free
Hmm.
and it has all of the latest things. I mean, somebody publishes a paper, you see that paper right away in archive, and then you go to the associated GitHub repo to get access to that modeling approach right away. So I think that's why we've kind of, as an industry, gravitated towards
Yeah.
open source. But yeah.
It can go two ways. I've also been using commercial software, commercial database that because it was so expensive, um, there wasn't a large community. And so when you were in
Right.
trouble, it was very hard to get answers to your questions. So yeah, it goes both ways.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. That if you're using more popular open source libraries, you can just type the error that you're getting into a Google search, and you get back exactly the Stack Overflow page, the exact command that you need to fix your problem. Um, yeah, so that's a really good point. And it's interesting. So I wanted to come back to, you're talking about LaTeX and spending 6 months of your PhD perfecting the layout. So LaTeX, for listeners who aren't aware, is a typesetting language. So I wrote my book in LaTeX. I wrote my PhD thesis in LaTeX. It allows you actually at the command line, if you'd like to write beautiful PDFs, and it scales up nicely. So especially, if you're writing something that is only a few pages long, doing that in a real-time editor like Microsoft Word or Google Docs, that isn't too cumbersome. But when you have documents that are hundreds of pages long, it makes it nice if you can have your chapters or sections broken out into different text files, and then those all compile together, and it makes the whole process a lot more manageable. It also, I mean, it's what when books are ultimately published, they're often done in LaTeX, so it also can give you the kind of the crispest layout possible. Um, but so the reason why I'm talking about LaTeX so much is it's interesting that the very next episode that I'm recording, which I anticipate will be episode 533, that will probably be released the week after listeners are hearing this episode,
Hmm.
is with someone named Brett Tully. And Brett Tully and I did our PhDs at the same time. We were roommates. We were doing our PhDs at Oxford together. And he made this amazing LaTeX template for his PhD. I just took it and used it. It was to all of the formatting guidelines that we had at Oxford. And so for me, it's interesting that one of the reasons why I then loved LaTeX so much is it meant that I didn't futz around with formatting. So I found, prior to getting into LaTeX, I would primarily use Word or Google Docs. And when I do that, I spend a crazy amount of my writing time futzing with like how this particular page looks or this particular image looks, as opposed to just getting the content in there. And when you're working with LaTeX, particularly if you do it at the command line, you're just hammering out content, and I wasn't worrying about formatting at all. But so anyway, it's two very different experiences
Oh yeah,
with LaTeX.
you took the smart route.
I don't know. I kind of just
um,
got lucky. If Brett hadn't been there, I don't know. I
yeah.
would have been in the same situation as you, and I would have needed another year to finish my PhD.
Oh yeah. Having said that, I also did my figures in LaTeX. There is a
Oh
package
yeah.
called
Oh
Tix
yeah.
that I use that
Mhm.
I don't know how to use anymore. It's all forgotten. Um, but that produced one. If you're listening to this and you ever need to produce a a good looking figure programmatically, then Tix might be worthwhile looking into. TIKZ.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really
Yeah.
good point. And actually, something that we haven't even mentioned yet, one of the really useful things about LaTeX is writing math equations, which is how a
Mhm.
lot of people get into it. It is the most sophisticated framework that I'm aware of for being able to write equations however you'd like. So, and then as you say, you can use ticks for creating your figures. So you can create beautiful figures programmatically at the command line if you'd like to, or in a text file, whatever text editor you want to use. and all of these things can be seamlessly weaved together. Which is, yeah. So there's a bit of a learning curve, but
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
if you're making large documents, or you're going to be programmatically, if you're going to be, wanting to automatically generate a lot of the same style of figure, definitely something worth
Yeah.
investing in. And Beamer for
But also,
presentations.
if a figure or graph is based on data, it's really nice that that graph gets updated as soon as the data changes.
Totally.
So maybe you're doing some experiments, right, that produce some results that you have, I don't know, in a CSV format. Then it's really nice. And of course, you can do this also with R, and in Python. There are many ways to do this, but just being able to reproduce that is really nice. Yeah, yeah.
Totally. Yeah. So yeah. So didn't expect to go off on this LaTeX tangent, but hopefully it has been interesting for some of our listeners. Jeroen, something that I ask all of the guests on the show is for a book recommendation, and I know that you have one for us. Do you want to tell us about it?
Oh yeah, yeah. I um I have here Masters of Doom by David Kushner, and he writes about how Doom and Quake and the team behind it, its software, came into existence. And so it's a fascinating read. Not just it's of course related to games, but it's still related to technology,
Hmm.
um, and of course lots of drama in this.
No kidding.
Um, yeah, I still play these games regularly. I'm also creating a map for Quake One, that is, so the game that came out in '96, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, it's not a data science book, but it is a nice one if you're looking to read something in a different
Yeah, and
field.
it blends kind of technology and history in an interesting way, especially if there's drama. That can be really interesting to read.
Yes.
And yeah, those games when they came out in the '90s, I'm getting the impression from the things we talk about that we're very much the
Hmm.
same age. But I remember when Doom came out, it was there had been some 3D games before, like Wolfenstein 3D,
Hmm.
but Doom was a game changer in terms of being able to have a 3D video game experience. So much so that I remember insisting that my grandmother come with me to the bookstore so that I could get the strategy guide to how to play Doom. But we didn't even have a computer. We didn't have computers at home. I didn't have access to a computer at school at that time. But I
Yeah.
just knew that this super cool thing was going on, and so I learned about all the different kinds of guns and monsters from the like a guidebook. Um,
We
anyway,
should
that's a really cool
set up a death
recommendation.
match at some point.
um, what does that entail? It sounds painful.
Oh, a death match is just a coin, a term that was coined by John Romero, right? One of the founders of its software, and it's a type of game where you just try to kill each other in the game as often as possible. So yeah, and this can
Got
be
it.
one on one or one versus many, team versus team. Yeah. No, that's a different name. That's a different type of game, actually. But yeah, many versus many deathmatch, and it's used to be all the rage on LAN parties. Um, yeah,
Yeah, prior to widespread internet, when you were on
and
dial-up modems, you'd
yeah,
literally physically
we're
network
showing
the
our
computers
age
together.
here,
Yeah.
John. Yeah.
Yeah, very. I'd say very cool, but I'm not sure that this conversation has
Oh,
been very cool.
it, well, to make it relevant again,
Yeah, yeah.
John Romero's wife, Brenda Romero, who's also a game designer, she recently had a tweet about, okay, um, she was wondering how many game designers were actually using Python and Pandas in order to analyze their data,
No
or were
kidding.
they still using Excel and sorting these columns? Of course, I immediately reached out, still waiting to hear back from her. But it's all tied together. There's data in every field, and that's what makes data science so interesting, right?
Yeah, and so broadly applicable. Cool. Yeah, definitely an application that I didn't anticipate discussing today, but absolutely love doing. Jeroen, we've learned so much from you today, not only on LaTeX and Doom, but also on the command line and how it can be so useful in data science. So, how can people stay in touch with you, follow your work? What's the best way to stay up to date on the latest on working at the command line?
Right. So, two main websites. The one for the book is datascience at thecommandline.com, where you can read, well, both the first edition and the second edition. I can recommend the second edition, although I am a bit biased. Um, and if you want to get a hold of me or follow whatever it is I am doing, I am on Twitter and LinkedIn. And the easiest way to get to me is through my company's website, which is datascienceworkshops.com. And I always love to hear from others whenever they are stuck with something or whether they have a suggestion for some cool tool that they found. So, yeah.
Awesome. All right, Jeroen, this has been such a fun episode to film with you. I've
Yeah.
really enjoyed this. I've learned a lot. And yeah, hopefully we can
Likewise.
have you on the show again sometime in the future.
I would love that. Thank you so much for having me, John.
I loved filming this episode with Jeroen today. He's so effortlessly cool while explaining relatively complex technical topics. He seems like a genuinely, exceptionally happy individual who would brighten anyone's day. In today's episode, the beautiful ray of sunshine, Jeroen, covered how both his book, Data Science at the Command Line, and its associated Docker container of hundreds of software dependencies are freely available online. He talked about how the newly released second edition covers how to do everything a data scientist would need to at the command line, including creating command line tools, modeling data, and using the command line as the polyglot glue between different languages like Python, R, JavaScript, anything. He talked about the awesome OSEMN, the awesome approach to data science defined by Hilary Mason and Chris Wiggins, which involves obtaining, scrubbing, exploring, modeling, and interpreting data. And that's the approach that he follows in his book. As always, you can get all the show notes, including the transcript for this episode, the video recording, any materials mentioned on the show, the URLs for Jeroen's LinkedIn and Twitter profiles, as well as my own social media profiles at www.superdatascience.com/531. That's superdatascience.com/531. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd of course greatly appreciate it if you left a review on your favorite podcasting app or on the Super Data Science YouTube channel. I also encourage you to let me know your thoughts on this episode directly by adding me on LinkedIn or Twitter and then tagging me in a post about it. Your feedback is invaluable for helping us shape future episodes of the show. All right. Thanks to Ivana, Mario, Jaime, JP, and Kirill on the Super Data Science team for managing and producing another fun and informative episode for us today. Keep on rocking it out there, folks, and I'm looking forward to enjoying another round of the Super Data Science podcast with you very soon.